The most dangerous moment in a relationship with a narcissistic person is not necessarily when they are violently angry or lashing out at you. It is actually the precise moment when they finally understand that you are never coming back to them. When they realize that the door is permanently closed, they do not react the way you might expect them to. They do not always chase after you desperately. They do not always drop to their knees and beg for another chance. And surprisingly, they do not always explode into a massive fit of rage. Instead of doing any of those predictable things, they do something far more calculated. And yet, almost no one in the psychological space talks about it. If this specific dynamic is resonating with you right now, or if you have lived through this exact shift in their behavior and just could not figure out how to explain it to anyone else, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, or share it with someone who really needs some clarity today. Understanding this hidden dynamic is not about getting revenge against the person who hurt you. It is entirely about getting your freedom back. When a narcissistic individual reaches the undeniable point where they know for an absolute fact that you will never come back, the very first and most deeply destabilizing experience for them is the final, complete loss of control. You have to understand that this is not about losing a loving relationship in the way a healthy, emotionally mature person understands a breakup. For a narcissist, the control they have over you literally is the relationship. Control is the primary mechanism through which they regulate their own chaotic emotions. It is how they maintain their fragile self-image, and it is the only way they protect themselves from overwhelming feelings of deep inadequacy or internal emptiness. As long as there is even a tiny, small chance that you might eventually return to them, or even just argue with them, explain your side of the story, or react to their provocations, they still feel a comforting sense of leverage over your life. The concrete knowledge that you are permanently and totally gone removes that precious leverage entirely and forever. This sudden realization creates a profound and terrifying psychological threat for them. Narcissistic functioning fundamentally relies on the core belief that they can successfully influence how other people feel, how other people think, and how other people respond to their presence. When you finally stop responding to them altogether, when you stop engaging in their endless drama, and when you stop orbiting their emotional gravity like a satellite, it sends a clear signal. It signals to them that they no longer have any access whatsoever to your internal emotional world. This is deeply unsettling and extremely frightening for them because it forces them to confront the exact thing they have worked tirelessly their entire lives to avoid. It confronts them with absolute powerlessness. Emotionally healthy individuals can tolerate feelings of powerlessness as a normal, albeit frustrating, part of life. Narcissists absolutely cannot tolerate it. Experiencing this powerlessness immediately triggers intense shame, a terrifying sense of vulnerability, and a feeling of complete internal collapse. The complete loss of control also completely shatters the narcissist's lifelong illusion of superiority. If you possess the strength to just walk away and actually stay away for good, it directly challenges the comforting story they constantly tell themselves. It challenges their deeply held belief that they are completely indispensable, incredibly special, and totally irreplaceable to anyone who meets them. Your permanent absence becomes undeniable, living evidence that their influence over you was never actually as absolute or powerful as they genuinely believed it was. Rather than processing this deep psychological insight in a healthy way or reflecting on their own actions, they immediately build strong mental defenses against it. To cope with the harsh reality of you leaving, they may aggressively minimize your overall value, radically devalue your importance in their life, or simply convince themselves that they were the ones who actually chose to disengage from the relationship first. These specific mental distortions are not simple lies in the traditional sense of the word. They're deeply ingrained psychological survival strategies designed to keep their fragile ego from shattering completely. What makes this specific phase particularly intense and dangerous is that there is absolutely no external fix for their emotional pain. They know they cannot argue you back into submission. They know they cannot charm you back with fake apologies. And they know they cannot provoke you back into a dramatic fight. Without any access to you and your emotional energy, they are forced to just sit there with a completely unregulated, chaotic internal state. This is exactly why the final loss of control so often leads them to develop increased psychological rigidity, a sense of emotional numbness, or a simmering, covert hostility. It is simply their mind's desperate attempt to restore a feeling of dominance in a situation where absolutely no dominance exists anymore. Once a narcissist fully realizes that you will never come back to them, attempting direct engagement becomes entirely too risky for their fragile ego. Because of this fear, they very often shift their behavior into a pattern of silent surveillance. You need to understand that this behavior is not driven by innocent curiosity, and it is absolutely not a sign of romantic longing in any healthy, normal sense. It is a highly calculated monitoring behavior that is entirely driven by their own internal anxiety, their deep-seated sense of entitlement over you, and their desperate need to secretly reassert psychological dominance without ever actually exposing themselves to the pain of your direct rejection. Contacting you directly at this point would mean that they have to acknowledge your independence and your personal autonomy. And your autonomy is the single thing that threatens their ego more than anything else in the world. Watching you from a safe, hidden distance allows them to feel intimately informed about your life without ever having to be emotionally vulnerable themselves. This silent surveillance can take many different forms depending on the person. They might check all of your social media profiles obsessively throughout the day. They might pay extremely close attention to exactly who is interacting with your posts, liking your photos, or leaving comments. They might also actively gather private information about your daily life by subtly questioning mutual acquaintances or friends that you both share. Sometimes this surveillance is very subtle, hidden, and entirely covert. Other times, it becomes incredibly obvious and relentless. But the actual method does not matter as much as the underlying motive. What they are really doing is tracking your emotional state. They are constantly checking to see whether you are actively suffering without them, whether your life is completely stagnant, or whether you are actually thriving and moving forward. If you appear to be genuinely happy, successful, or emotionally regulated after the breakup, it deeply destabilizes them all over again. The undeniable fact of your personal stability without them in your life completely contradicts the false narrative they created. It destroys the story that you desperately needed them just to function in the real world. That glaring contradiction creates an intense cognitive dissonance in their mind that they simply cannot tolerate. At the exact same time they are spying on your success, they are also desperately looking for any possible openings to crawl back into your life. Silent surveillance allows them to constantly scan your daily activities for any brief moments of weakness, deep loneliness, or major life transition. If you go through a new breakup, experience a personal loss, or even just publish a vague, slightly emotional post on the internet, they will instantly interpret that as an open invitation to re-enter your life. This is exactly why their first attempt at contact often comes long after the initial relationship has completely ended, usually arriving precisely at the moment when you truly believed they were gone for good. In their distorted mindset, the passage of time does not signal closure or the healthy end of a chapter. It only signals a fresh opportunity for them to strike again. Maintaining their distance gives them total plausible deniability. It perfectly preserves their fragile self-image if they eventually do choose to reappear and you decide to reject them again. There is also a very dark, punitive element to this specific monitoring behavior. By actively refusing to engage with you openly and honestly, they are attempting to artificially flip the power dynamic in their favor. Their total silence becomes a weapon. It becomes a way to quietly suggest that you are completely insignificant to them now, while they are secretly ensuring that you remain psychologically present and active in their daily thoughts. They want to know for a fact that they still exist in your awareness, even if they are no longer visible in your actual life. This behavior is not true absence. It is an insidious form of control achieved through total invisibility. What makes this silent surveillance particularly unsettling to deal with is that it is entirely fueled by their grand sense of entitlement. They genuinely believe they have a permanent, undeniable right to access information about you simply because you once served a useful psychological function for them in the past. Even long after you physically pack up and leave, that bizarre sense of ownership does not disappear from their mind. Watching you live your life from afar allows them to completely avoid taking any real accountability for their actions, while simultaneously maintaining the comfortable illusion that they are still intimately connected to you. It makes them feel like they are still a relevant character in your story, and most importantly, it makes them feel like they are still positioned high above you, rather than being locked safely outside of your life where they belong. When a narcissist finally knows you are never coming back, they very often shift their energy directly into what can accurately be described as image repair mode. You must realize that this is never about genuine self-reflection, and it is certainly never about personal growth or taking responsibility for their past mistakes. It is entirely a strategic, highly calculated response to the massive threat their delicate ego has just experienced. Your permanent departure from their life creates a massive, gaping rupture in the fictional story they tell themselves and everyone else about exactly who they are. To a narcissistic personality, being publicly seen by the world as rejected, abandoned, or left behind by a partner is completely intolerable. It loudly suggests to the public that there is some sort of deep flaw or deficiency within them, and personal deficiency is something they simply cannot psychologically accept or integrate into their worldview. So, instead of quietly processing the pain of the loss internally like a normal person would, they violently move their energy outward and begin heavily managing public perception. They become completely preoccupied with how the situation looks to the outside world, completely ignoring what the situation actually means. Even a polite reply from you, no matter how small, signals to them that the door is not fully closed. That single signal matters much more to them than the actual content of the conversation ever could. This delayed form of hoovering also serves another purpose for them. It allows them to rewrite the history of your relationship in their own minds. With enough time passing, they eventually convince themselves that the conflict between you was completely mutual, that your reactions were blown out of proportion, or that the entire issue was resolved simply by the distance between you. This mental revision significantly reduces the risk of them feeling any shame when they finally decide to reach out. They are not returning as the person who caused you so much pain. They are returning as someone who is just checking in, someone who is offering closure, or someone who is graciously extending a hand of goodwill. This convenient reframing protects their ego while simultaneously positioning you as the one who must now decide how kind, mature, or forgiving you want to be. What makes this delayed hoovering particularly destabilizing is that it almost always occurs exactly when you are finally doing better in your own life. Your stability, your personal growth, and your emotional detachment register as a direct challenge to their significance. This reach out is not a sign that they are missing you in a healthy way. It is a reactive move to the fact that they no longer occupy space in your inner world. The timing of this is rarely accidental. It almost always coincides with moments when they sense that your independence has fully solidified, and the attempt becomes a last-ditch effort to reinsert themselves into your life. They do this not to rebuild a healthy connection, but to reassert their relevance in a dynamic they stubbornly believe should never fully end. When a narcissist knows for certain that you will never come back, rewriting history becomes a psychological necessity for them rather than a simple choice. The actual reality of the relationship threatens their self-concept, so the past must be reshaped into something they can actually live with. They cannot hold on to a version of events in which they caused real harm and still see themselves as competent, superior, or justified human beings. Accepting the full truth would require them to feel accountability, and accountability always activates deep feelings of shame. For a narcissist, shame is not a mild or manageable emotion. It feels completely annihilating to their sense of self. To avoid this, their memory itself becomes flexible. This rewriting often happens quietly and gradually. Specific events are minimized, altered, or stripped of their original emotional weight. Moments where you expressed legitimate pain are reframed as you being over-emotional or overreacting. Boundaries you set are recalled as acts of betrayal against them. Their own manipulative or abusive behaviors are reinterpreted as reasonable responses to your supposed character flaws. Over time, this distorted version of the past becomes the only one they can actually access. It is not necessarily that they are consciously lying to you at every turn. It is that their mind selectively edits reality to preserve their psychological survival. What makes this process particularly destabilizing for those who lived through the relationship is how confidently the narcissist holds on to this revised story. They speak with absolute certainty, often with a sense of moral clarity about what really happened between you. This conviction can cause you to feel self-doubt, especially if you were already conditioned during the relationship to question your own perceptions. The rewritten history is not just a private defense mechanism for them. It becomes a tool they use to justify their past behavior, recruit sympathy from others, and position themselves as the misunderstood or wronged party. Rewriting history also allows them to detach emotionally from you without ever having to go through the process of grieving. Healthy separation requires acknowledging both the good parts of the relationship and the harm that was done. Narcissists simply cannot integrate that kind of complexity. By flattening the past into a simple story where they were the reasonable one and you were the difficult one, they eliminate all emotional conflict. This simplification protects them from loss, from feelings of remorse, and from any sense of vulnerability. It also preserves the comforting fantasy that nothing meaningful was lost when you finally walked away. Over time, this altered narrative becomes the permanent foundation for any future interactions they might have with you. If they ever do reach out again, they do so from this revised version of reality. Their apologies will lack any real depth because the harm you experienced no longer exists in their memory. Accountability feels entirely unnecessary to them because, in their mind, there is absolutely nothing to account for. This is exactly why conversations about closure feel so circular and invalidating. You are speaking from your own lived experience, while they are speaking from a reconstructed past that was specifically designed to defend against their own psychological collapse. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, seeking out a replacement is rarely about finding connection or healing. It is almost always about finding a distraction from an internal state they cannot tolerate. Your absence creates a vacuum, not a vacuum of love, but a vacuum of regulation. You once absorbed their emotions, you validated their identity, and you stabilized their fragile self-image. Without that specific function being filled, they experience intense restlessness, irritability, and a sense of internal chaos. A new person becomes a way for them to silence that discomfort rather than address the root cause. This replacement is often rushed and superficial. The intimacy might appear very intense early on, but that is because it is performative, not earned. The narcissist mirrors their new partner, idealizes them, and accelerates the attachment process to recreate the emotional control they lost with you. What looks to the outside world like moving on is actually a frantic attempt to overwrite the destabilizing impact of your departure. They are not choosing someone new because that person fits them better. They are choosing whoever is available, responsive, and emotionally open enough to plug the gap you left behind. Importantly, this new connection is not evidence that you were replaceable. It is evidence that they cannot sit alone with themselves. Solitude forces a level of self-awareness that threatens the fragile structure they rely on to function. The replacement allows them to avoid introspection entirely. As long as someone else is reacting to them, admiring them, or struggling to please them, they do not have to confront the loss of control that your absence represents. This dynamic also serves an external purpose for them. Being seen with someone new helps them reinforce the image that they are desirable, wanted, and totally unaffected by your exit. It is a way to communicate indirectly to you and to others that they are winning. The new relationship becomes a prop rather than a genuine bond. The new person is unconsciously assigned a specific role, not welcomed into their life as an equal partner. They are expected to regulate the narcissist's emotions, validate their identity, and absorb their projections just as you once did. Over time, the same destructive patterns will inevitably emerge because nothing has changed internally. The charm will fade, the entitlement will surface, and the emotional demands will escalate. The new replacement is not spared this fate because the fundamental issue was never about you. It was always about the narcissist's desperate dependence on external sources to manage an unstable inner world. Your departure did not cause this cycle of behavior. It simply exposed it for what it truly is. When a narcissist knows you are never coming back, one of their more subtle responses is punitive indifference. This is not a sign of genuine detachment or emotional maturity. It is a defensive posture designed to reclaim a sense of superiority after their loss of control. By acting as though you never mattered to them at all, they attempt to reverse the power dynamic. If they can convince themselves and others that you were insignificant, then your departure no longer feels like a rejection. It feels like a dismissal that they chose to initiate. This indifference is often highly performative. It may show up as sudden emotional coldness, a refusal to acknowledge any part of your shared history, or an almost exaggerated lack of reaction when your name comes up. The message they want to convey is that your presence in their life was irrelevant and that your absence is completely inconsequential. This stance protects them from the pain of vulnerability. Admitting that you mattered would mean admitting a significant loss, and that loss would mean facing a level of pain they are not equipped to process.